The wind carried with it the faint rustle of late autumn leaves as Henry Calloway adjusted his cap and stepped out of his weather-beaten farmhouse. His knees protested with every movement, but he ignored them. At 78 years old, pain had long become his companion. What mattered now was dignity, the kind that had carried him through the jungles of Vietnam, the deserts of Kuwait, and the long nights when memories of lost brothers returned like shadows at his bedside. Henry's land was his last battlefield. 20 acres of stubborn earth, pine trees, and the house he built with his own hands. Developers had been circling like vultures, led by a neighbor who saw profit in every patch of soil. And now the dispute had landed him in a county courthouse under the gaze of Judge Malcolm Crane. Crane was the kind of man who wore his power like armor, tall, silver-haired, with a voice that dripped arrogance. He had presided over cases for 20 years without anyone daring to challenge his word. People said he was brilliant. Others whispered he was cruel. Henry had no opinion of him yet, but that would change in a matter of minutes. The courtroom smelled faintly of polish and paper. Wooden benches creaked as townsfolk settled in. Henry, wearing his faded dress jacket, the same one that bore his medals on Memorial Day, took his place at the front. Across the aisle, the neighbor's lawyer smirked, already confident of victory. When Judge Crane entered, the bailiff barked for everyone to rise. Henry stood slowly, back straight despite the years. He had stood for generals, for presidents, for flag-draped coffins. He would stand now. The proceedings began. Paper shuffled and voices droned. Henry spoke when asked, his words measured, steady. He explained that the land had been in his family for generations, that he had tended it long after others abandoned theirs. But every time he spoke, Judge Crane's lips curled. Finally, he leaned forward, his voice carrying sharp enough to pierce the silence. "Mr. Calloway," he said, dragging out the syllables as though tasting something bitter. "You speak of family land and service as though they entitle you to special treatment. This courtroom is not a shrine to your past adventures." A ripple of discomfort spread through the benches. Henry stiffened. Adventures? He remembered dragging wounded comrades through mortar fire, patching bleeding wounds with trembling hands, and burying 19-year-old boys who never saw another sunrise. Adventures. Crane wasn't finished. "Your so-called service does not excuse you from the law. Medals, uniforms, stories of glory, they are trinkets. This court rules on facts, not nostalgia." Gasps echoed through the room. One woman in the back muttered, "Did he just say that?" Henry's lawyer tried to interject, but Crane slammed his gavel. "Silence! This is my court, and I will not have it turned into a veterans' parade." Henry sat quietly, hands folded. His jaw tightened, but he did not speak. He had faced worse insults in darker places. Still, something shifted in the room. People looked at him with pity, at the judge with disbelief. The neighbor's lawyer smirked less now, sensing the tide of opinion shifting. Crane delivered his ruling with cold precision. The neighbor had rights to the disputed land. Henry was to relinquish it within 60 days. And then, as though to drive a nail into an old man's chest, he added, "Perhaps it's time you stopped clinging to relics, Mr. Calloway. The world belongs to the living, not the fading." The gavel fell. Henry rose slowly, his cane steadying him. He looked at the judge, not with anger, but with a calm that unnerved even Crane. Then he nodded once, turned, and walked out. The silence that followed was heavier than the ruling itself. Outside, reporters lingered. The courthouse steps became a stage as Henry paused to catch his breath. Someone asked what he thought of the ruling. He only said, "I served this country because I believed in justice. Today, justice looked away. That's all." Then he walked on, vanishing into the crowd. That night, in diners and living rooms across town, the story spread. The old veteran humiliated in court. The judge's words replayed like a bitter echo. Trinkets, relics, fading. By morning, the local paper ran the headline, "Judge Belittles War Veteran in Open Court." The phone lines at the courthouse rang non-stop. Letters poured in. Emails, too. Veterans groups began to stir, voices of outrage growing louder. Social media carried Henry's quiet words farther than he ever imagined. And yet, Henry himself said nothing more. He sat on his porch, sipping black coffee, watching the world react around him. He had fought battles with bullets and blood. Now others would fight this one with words and fire he no longer had to ignite. Inside the courthouse, Judge Crane dismissed the uproar at first. "Public sentiment," he sneered to his clerk. "It will fade." But as the days passed, he noticed the stares from colleagues, the whispers when he walked down the hall, the hesitation in the voices of those who once sought his approval. Something had begun, a reckoning he had not anticipated. And Henry Calloway, silent as the graveyards he had once walked, knew time had just become his ally. The storm was gathering. The courthouse looked the same on the outside, its red brick facade, its proud columns reaching for the sky, but inside it no longer felt like a temple of authority. It felt like a storm front. Clerks whispered in corners, lawyers lingered longer than usual in the halls, and every conversation seemed to circle back to one man, Judge Malcolm Crane. The story had grown wings. Local newspapers became regional. Regional became national. A veteran humiliated by a judge. It was the kind of headline that stirred outrage in a country still tied to its soldiers' sacrifices. Veterans associations held vigils outside the courthouse, flags waving in the cold wind, banners reading, "Respect our heroes, justice for Calloway." Henry, to his credit, did not appear at any of them. He remained at home, tending to his chickens, chopping wood in slow, steady swings, and drinking coffee on his porch while cameras parked across the street. When asked for comment, he would only smile politely and say, "I've said all I needed to. The rest isn't mine to decide." But the silence of one man only made the noise louder elsewhere. The Department of Judicial Conduct opened an inquiry, citing possible misconduct unbecoming of a judge. For the first time in his career, Crane received a letter not of praise or promotion, but of investigation. He crumpled it in his hand, veins bulging in his temple. "This is absurd," he muttered in his chambers, pacing like a caged animal. His clerk, a young woman with kind eyes, chose her words carefully. "Sir, people are angry. They feel disrespected." "Disrespected? By what? A few words of truth? I will not bow to sentimentality. The law is the law, and if we let every old soldier wave a flag to win sympathy, where would order be?" But his voice faltered. He remembered the gasps in that courtroom, the faces that turned cold. He remembered Henry's eyes, calm, unshaken, eyes that had seen more than he ever would. The whispers grew louder. Old cases resurfaced. Lawyers who once feared him now spoke openly of his harsh rulings, his habit of mocking defendants, his temper that crossed the line into cruelty.
Journalists dug through archives, finding moments when Crane had shown disdain not just for veterans, but for widows, for the poor, for anyone who couldn't match his pedigree. The veteran's story had opened the floodgates. Meanwhile, Henry began to receive letters, hundreds of them, from men who had fought in Korea, from women who had nursed the wounded in World War II, from young Marines stationed overseas. Some letters contained only 2 words, "Thank you." Others poured out pages of memories, grief, gratitude. Henry read each one slowly, carefully, sometimes wiping a tear, sometimes smiling faintly. One evening, his neighbor, the very one who had filed the case against him, appeared on his porch. The man looked uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot. "Henry," he began, I didn't expect things to turn this way. I just wanted the land, nothing more. I didn't want you disrespected." Henry studied him, then nodded. "Land can be bought and sold," he said quietly. "Respect is harder to earn, but it can still be earned if you try." The man swallowed, ashamed, and left without another word. In the courthouse, the inquiry deepened. Crane was called to testify before an oversight panel. The hearing room was packed, cameras rolling, every word documented. He sat stiffly, his robe replaced by a plain suit, but the arrogance was harder to remove.
"Judge Crane," one investigator asked, "did you tell Mr. Calloway that his military service amounted to so-called service, and that his medals were trinkets?" Crane shifted. "My words may have been misinterpreted." "They're on record," the investigator replied flatly. Gasps rippled through the audience. Crane flushed. "I meant only that this court cannot be swayed by sentiment. The law is impartial." Another voice cut in. "Impartial is not the same as cruel, Judge. The dignity of those who serve this country deserves respect, regardless of legal standing. Would you agree?" For the first time in public, Crane faltered. He hesitated, lips parting, no words coming. The silence was damning. The next morning, the headlines were merciless. "Judge dodges accountability. Veterans demand resignation." At home, Henry read the paper with steady hands. He did not gloat. He did not smile. He only whispered, "It's not me he owes. It's all of them." Crane's department suspended him pending review. His colleagues distanced themselves. Old friends stopped answering his calls. Even his family avoided the spotlight. Alone in his large, immaculate house, Crane stared at his reflection in the mirror and for the first time saw not authority, but fear. The final blow came 3 weeks later. A public apology was demanded, not suggested, demanded by the Oversight Board. It would be televised, broadcast across the state. Crane resisted, raged, cursed, but resistance crumbled under the weight of reality. His career hung by a thread, and the thread would snap if he refused. The day arrived. The hearing chamber was filled once again, veterans in uniform lining the rows, flags folded neatly in their laps. At the front sat Henry Calloway, wearing his simple jacket, medals pinned not as ornaments, but as memories of brothers lost. Crane entered, shoulders hunched. He took his place at the podium, cleared his throat, and faced the cameras. His voice trembled. "I stand here today to acknowledge my words and actions. In addressing Mr. Calloway, I showed a lack of respect that no veteran, no citizen should endure. My words were careless, my tone cruel. For that, I am deeply sorry." He paused, eyes flickering toward Henry. For a moment, their gazes locked. Crane's voice broke. "I cannot undo the harm, but I hope my regret is clear. I was wrong." The room was silent. Then Henry rose slowly, leaning on his cane. He studied the man before him, the robe gone, the arrogance stripped away.
just a man crumbling under the weight of his own pride. Henry nodded once. "Regret is a start," he said, his voice carrying through the chamber. "Living differently is the rest." Then he sat down. The room erupted in applause, not for Crane, but for Henry. Veterans stood, saluting. Reporters scribbled furiously. The judge's career was effectively over, but Henry's dignity had become immortal. In the weeks that followed, Crane resigned quietly, retreating into obscurity. His name faded from the courthouse walls, replaced by whispers of disgrace. Henry, however, became a symbol. His porch became a gathering place for young veterans who sought his counsel, for neighbors who finally saw the man behind the quiet smile. He never asked for the role, but he accepted it with the same calm grace he had shown all his life. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the fields glowed gold, a young soldier asked him, "Mr. Calloway, how did you stay so calm through all of it, when he insulted you, when the world watched?" Henry sipped his coffee, eyes on the horizon. He said softly, "Because I've learned something. In battle, anger clouds your aim. In life, it clouds your judgment. Sometimes the best way to fight is to let others see the truth for themselves." The soldier nodded, thoughtful, and Henry Calloway leaned back, the weight of years heavy on his shoulders, but his heart light. He had not sought revenge, only dignity. In the end, dignity had been enough to bring a judge to his knees. The night settled over his land, the quiet of the earth surrounding him. He had fought his last battle, not with bullets, but with silence, patience, and the truth that arrogance can never outrun justice. And in that silence, he found peace.
For more stories like this, please like, subscribe, and share my channel, Wrongly Judged.